Can everyone see the screen? Hello. Okay, welcome to HBP 2020 debating seminar. In HBP 2020, we have Kak Agnes from BINUS, we have Kak Adam from UI, and we have me and myself, May from UNHAS. So in this HBP 2020, obviously we have a British Parliamentary, so we're going to just directly present and talk about the debating basics in this HBP 2020 that we are going to conduct tomorrow. So firstly, about the debating format. As usual, of course, it's a British Parliamentary, 4 teams representing 2 sides, government and opposition. 2 teams, each team consists of 2 members. Opening and closing teams are defending the same side. They are judged as 2 different teams. Our preparation or case building times is up to for 15 minutes, and speech is only allowed for 7-20 minutes. POIs between the first and 6 minutes. So it's pretty clear. Next is about the general roles in BP tournament. So in opening bench, you guys are responsible to at least set up the debate. Either as if you are a government, you need to provide or set up the debate as what you think and deem necessary to be debated upon. As opposition, if you're an opposition, you need to recontextualize the debate if you think that the world or the setup that have been provided by government is not fit towards the debate, or you do not agree with the setup that being presented by government world bench. You can do this by identifying the harms that happen in your opponent's case or the status quo and the benefits that will accrue under their own world that government bench are trying to provide in the debate. Secondly, in opening, it's pretty clear that you are responsible to provide a model or mechanism to the debate. If you are having especially if you're having a proposal motions, this house would, and throwing a counter proposal if you are an opposition, or maybe if you want to stick with status quo, you don't need to provide counter proposal. Instead, you can stick with the status quo and tell why then status quo is good enough, right? So next, closing roles. Firstly, explain if you want to be an ideal closing. We think you need to explain that what is actually missing from opening bench and break a deadlock in which are still being questioned, maybe by judge, and show or explain what is actually the most necessary and important debate that you are going to explain in your speech as closing benches in the debate. Second, you can have a new justification or effectivity to the solution that you are going to provide to the judge. Thirdly, add a contextualization or try to picturize more and bring more urgency towards the debate and why it is more important rather than what opening bench already told us in the room. Lastly, bring new rebuttals to opponent teams. Don't be dismissive towards your opponents and be more be more responsive towards the positive or negative keys that have been provided by your opponents. Next, we think this is the most important thing in the debate, that your judge, your adjudicator, assess which team the best to persuade them with a logical explanation that the motion ought to be carried or rejected. So basically the judge are an ordinary intelligent voter. They are ordinary voter that are having a small set of technical rules which are there in the debate room to facilitate, not to displace and analyze an argument. So that is why a judge should be not biased or maybe not step into the debate and should be carried by what has happened in reality in the debate room. Next, speaker's role, so I'm just going to divide it into four. First, about the Prime Minister. You are responsible to create context, explain the context of the debate, what is necessary and what is actually happening, the definitions, parameter of framework, stance, and model if the motion requires you to do so, or you think that the motion need to be set in certain way or in certain mechanism that you deem necessary. Your setup is also must be clearly linked to the motion as a whole, should be reasonable and also debatable in the debate. And keep in mind and also remember that do not always try to limit or restrict the debate to certain specific areas. Maybe if you are debating upon gay rights in certain countries, you do not, and you are you don't need to, you know, like having the most conservative countries that you are trying to not accepting government proposal just because the certain specific areas you defend that don't need gay rights is the most conservative country, right? So I don't think that that is a good strategy if you want to have a good context or good model in your debate. Second, you need to bring arguments to support the setup, and you need to also importantly explain why your setup is why your arguments is matter to be debated upon in the debate room. Next, leader of opposition. First, if you found that your prime minister is quite unclear or fairly untrue or also not responsible of his or her setup, they don't actually give you a clear setup, no clear context, or maybe very, very less contribution into debate, as a LO, you are also responsible, and maybe judge will also question if you do not take this responsibility to reset up the debate. Second, you need to declare what do you want as opposition? What is your stance? Do you want to stick with status quo or bring a counter proposal or counter model? It's up to you, and it's up to the motion that requires so. Next is rebuttals and arguments, pretty classic. Next, it's about deputy. So first, if you deputy, you also requires to not be dismissive and answer the rebuttal from your opponent. You need to re-strengthen and rebuild your team case that have been attacked by your opponent. You could do a referring, and you could tell the judge and clarify to the judge that certain case by my prime minister, for example, or LO is never been touched by my opponent, and this is why this is very important. So you need to re-strengthen what have been built by your first speaker. Thirdly, you can have new rebuttals and argument, provide extensions to support your team case. But also remember that a new argument and extension doesn't always have to be entirely far away analysis, entirely new argument that is very, very new. And maybe if you have enough and quiet argument coming from your first speaker that is not well elaborated enough, you can also expand that idea. You can also bring deeper goal or maybe deeper analysis on that idea. So I think that can be still fairly counted by Edge as a debater. Fourth, tell the judge why the opening debate answer the most important question of the debate, and why you think that as opening, this is the most clear, and this is the exactly what should we debated upon in this debate, and why your team case is that enough to win the debate. So this is a member, and this we're going to explain as closing bench. So first, as member, explain where closing case different but better from the opening team. You can present and explain to the judge that this is the most important thing that need to be discussed in the debate, and this will also be answered by your closing government or closing opposition proposal. Second, you need to bring new rebuttals. Do not dismiss opening opening benches discussion, you also need to see and analyze that what is the most important thing and what is unnecessary in opening bench and what is necessary and more importantly to be talked about in closing bench. Thirdly, you also required to bring new arguments or extensions to the debate, new arguments which have not yet been met in the debate. So obviously, adjudicators don't want to hear repetitive arguments. So exactly, you need to have new responses. You have to build new analysis and have deeper and a bigger goal that shows you that you have a better proposal than your opening as a member. Lastly, in speaker roles, we have whip. First, you can have bring rebuttals, scrutiny all the merit of your opponents, and reduce the persuasiveness level of the opponent's material. This oftenly used by a whip to scrutiny and to clarify that what is actually happen in this debate and what is matter and what is important and unnecessary in the debate. So maybe as a whip, you can have, you most likely whip will have their clarification and their disclaimer on what is happening, because sometimes we can't see that a whip is most likely trying their, shaping their speech as a judge and see the whole debate as what it is and what should be in the debate. So second, amplify extensions materials brought by the member speaker. You can strengthen your member case. So you can extend what have been mentioned and what have been proved by your member case. You can analyze and add deeper analysis, and also better maybe characteristic of certain actors that have been dismissed by your opponents, and also other other arguments and also other things that have never been touched by your opponent as a whip. So thirdly, you must not bring new matter. So in whip, as a judge, I think judge is very clear that they don't want to have and face a new matter, because first it must be unfair for your opponents if you have a new matter brought by whip, especially as closing opposition, right? So I think this new matter is a completely new line of argumentation that has never been not been touched before, but a new analysis, precedents, or maybe examples proving why an established idea by your members is actually allowed and actually necessary for you as a whip to strengthen your case and bring new extension to the debate. That's for speaker roles. So let's try to take a note that number one, fulfilling roles will ease adjudicator, obviously, to follow the debate sequence and help your team to stay competitive in the round. But remember that this doesn't mean that you are automatically win the debate if you already fulfill those roles. Second, B, doesn't mean that you are immune and safe from the fourth rank. And C, you obviously will get a very high speaker score. Why? Because not fulfilling role, for example, you don't bring your very new extension as member of government, or maybe you don't bring rebuttals as deputy leader of opposition, also doesn't mean that you will get the fourth rank, because in debate there is no such automatic lose due to unfulfilled roles. Rather, if you don't do and you don't fulfill the speaker roles that are ideal towards the debate and that will ease adjudicator to follow the debate, you are missing out opportunities in which you can fortify your case and contribute in the debate's development. And we think that that is a good debate that should be happen in the debate. So next, about types of motions. Types of motion will be divided into, I forget, maybe 6 or 5. So first, about the these household motions or proposal motions. So the actor in this debate is undefined unless it's specified in the debate or in the motion particularly. But if you don't have the who is this house, which means team should be able to define what is most likely going to act as. Oftentimes, unless specified, this house is government of the state, government of a country, or government particularly. In this household motion, its BOP basically is, will the proposal solve the problem of your team identified? Maybe in opening government, what your prime minister told in their context, in their definition, in their framework, and also in their problems that are found in your prime minister as a good prime minister. You also need to explain why then your proposal in this household motion will solve the problem that you are presented in your setup. B is implementing the proposal is justified. This is also shows on what is the justification or why this proposal in your argument is actually true and should be done by your own case. In opposition, in this motion, in this particular motion, opposition BOP is up to the stand that opposition decide to take, whether or not you are trying to defending status quo, or maybe you are trying to proposing a counter proposal against a government world. So if you are an opposition and you want to defend status quo, you also a basic logic and a basic argument question will lead up to a question that is why then status quo can solve the problem organically. So that is as opposition. But if you want to defend more as opposition, you can also add an analysis and add a question. If you are against your prime minister case, you can question why implementing the motion will create another harm by a government world. So instead, why in opposition, you also explain why in opposition, if you stick with status quo, that will be will lead to actual good and maybe organic changes or anything. Next is this house belief that oftentimes this house belief that motions is a value judgment debate, but sometimes it can be turned into a policy debate by having a mechanism or maybe having a model that you want to do to support the motion that that will happen in debate. This motion also requires team to take the position of third party and analyze and argue in that position. So unless specified, you also need to see the position of a third party if the motion doesn't requires you, doesn't mention specific actors. The basic BOP is to prove why your statement is true, why your statement is justified, and why your statement is actually necessary in the debate. In proposition, in this motion, you doesn't need to show how they will enact the given principle. How you will like generate the given principle that you are trying to prove, but rather you are has to prove that it will be a good or bad idea to against the motion that presented and that debated. Next is this house support or this house oppose. This motion requires teams to answer a burden, to take a step back and analyze and observe and try to evaluate whether a certain phenomena, a certain trend or issues is good or is harmful. If it's not specified whether or not who is this house, teams are need to take position of a third party and analyze and argue in that position. This motion also demands or maybe like suggest a team to step further and add a mechanism to support or oppose the object of the motion. For example, funding, if you want to support LGBTQ rights, you are trying to also add a mechanism. How do you will support them, e.g. funding for their campaigns, demonstrating or protesting against a certain or actor policy that are harmful towards this LGBTQ rights, doing a boycott towards the malicious actors that are against towards this LGBTQ rights, and etc. So you can have an extra mechanism to support the motion. Next, this house regrets. So also, as well as other motions, unless specified, it use the perspective of third-party actor, maybe international community, or maybe average people. It depends on what the motion actually specified and what the motion wants, what is the spirit of the motion, right? So the motion forces team and demands teams to look at what already happened back then. So it's about a retrospective view, and you try to evaluate and analyze whether a certain trend, a certain condition, issues is harmful or bad according to the parameters set by teams in the debate. So these parameters are most likely an obligation for government, especially for prime minister, to set which parameter is good and which parameter is justified to be upheld in the debate and to be debated upon. Of course, these parameters set up by government team can also be challenged by opposition, and that is why the debate should be debatable, should have a debatable grounds, right? So the basic BOP, basic burden, is first why it is regrettable. Second, if you are opposition, you need to answer why then you do not regret this and why it is worthy to be to be upheld in your case. These motions also do not oblige you to do a direct action. This type of motion doesn't require any model or proposal that is obligatory. It is simply evaluating a thing, but if you think that a model or proposal is necessary, you can add by explaining why your model is necessary towards the debate to the adjudicators. So next, this house prefers a world. So in this motion, teams, all teams demands force teams to discuss the creation of said world and whether said new world is preferable in government or opposition. In doing so, teams should also be able to compare the qualities employed in the new world with qualities that the current world has. So you need to compare which world is actually good, which world is preferable in the debate. And also a basic comparative you can conclude that whether or not the new world that is presented by government is preferable, or as opposition that the current world we have is actually good enough and should be able to develop rather than a world that is preferred by government side of the house. Next is this house as X or Y, X or Y. Teams are forced and should put themselves in the position of X or Y, because you are position your team as the to have the point of view, to have the interest of this specific actor said and required by the motion, which means that in analyzing the motion, you should act or you should think accordance to the interest of and rationality of this specific actor said in the motion. So if the debate revolves around practicality, you need to explain why the benefit is good and suitable for X, why it is justified as X, why the characteristic is in line with, why the motion and the case is in line with the characteristic or the interest of X and Y. So the basic burden in this motion is that why it is in line with X interest. Second, why implementing the proposal is morally acceptable as X perspective, or is it good for X perspective, or is it not harmful and also still in line with the what X interest per se. Next and lastly, I think this is the last, this house believe that X and Y should do blah, 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 blah. This motion requires team to position themselves as a third party actor, but it's not X or it's not Y. But you need to position yourself and analyze whether or not these certain motions is it's suitable for X to do so. So you are debating upon things that is necessary for X, that is justified for Y to do certain policies or certain things in the debate. This means that teams should also analyze why X should be the actor in the perspective of a third party. Why do you think X or Y is the most valuable actor that need to do certain policies or need to do certain action in the debate? Or if not to do, why then is it harmful if you are as X, then you do certain policies? So in this debate, you are also fairly good to discuss what is X interest, but it's contingent upon the explanation of why it is also suitable and it is also in line with the X interest, and it is important to be considered in the debate. For example, if the goal of the motion is benefiting X, does X fulfilling said interest and lead to trickle down impacts that benefit other actors that are also important in debate? So if you have specific actor, you need to build and provide an explanation why as X, as the specific actor, it is good for X, it is also good for other specific actors that you want to defend in debate. That's for types of motions. So let's jump to definitional challenge. So I think in a general debate, we might have the same perspective or the same, the same perspective of a debate, but it's also doesn't cause the chances to have not you sometimes in a debate you also have the different point of view of a debate, and this is why a definitional challenge is necessary. So you need to agree, and you need to, in a debate, you need to agree of certain definition that is agreed by teams in the debate, right? But if a team is presenting a definition that is not debatable, that is self-proving, that is has no link to the motion, you can give a challenge towards that definition presented by other teams. But remember that try to also analyze that, is this a suitable definition that is presented, or am I doing it wrong or anything? So only challenge the definition when there is no other way and you are agree that this is a undebatable and very self-proving definition. So in doing so, you can point out unfairness and tell the judge that that definition is untrue and that definition is unfair. Second, you need to prove what is the fair definition that should be debated upon, and why in your case that this definition would be preferable to be debated upon. That's definitional challenge. So next, proposition fiat. Proposition fiat means that this is an advantage for government team, that it assumes that the technicalities to support the motion is available. Second, the proposal will be passed in Congress or Parliament. So basically, proposition fiat prevent unnecessary discussion of the debate on how a Congress not doesn't agree at all, or how the technicalities or maybe fundings in a debate is less likely to be happen and less likely to be conducted. But even if proposition have this advantage that the technicalities is available and the Congress will pass, it doesn't assume that states will have a super budgeting, unlimited funding, and also doesn't mean that the Congress or Parliament will have full support until the end of the day. So you also need to discuss on whether or not this is sustainable, or maybe whether or not the Congress or Parliament will have the same interest and stick with that interest if the motion is applied or not. That's for proposition fiat. So last thing is about argument and also responses. So in argument, you have basically assertion, you have reasoning, and also you have link back, right? So in assertion, as judge, especially as judge, this will also ease you to follow the debater's speech and structure. But as debater, this is also ease you to follow and put the structure of your speech to be identified by your by people in the room. So this assertion contains a question or statement and also a conclusion of what you are trying to prove as a deductive sentence. So for example, this House support permanent move to online tertiary education. The question statement is why then tertiary education should be permanently reformed into online education, and the deductive statement is online tertiary education creates wider accessibility, especially individuals who cannot afford offline education. So you basically in assertion, you are trying to introduce your ideas to judge, but it not yet contains a reasonable reason that is proof why then your assertion and your idea is good enough or not. So it will be presented in reasoning when you elaborate your statement. The question, if you want to try to analyze whether or not your reasoning is good enough or your reasoning is valuable for the judge to count, is questioning these 4 questions. Why is it true? Why is it significant? Why your argument is that important to be considered in the debate? Why is it exclusive? And why in opposition, for example, it's inclusive and it's not going to be that exclusive in their side of the house, so better it's in our side of the house. And lastly, what is the comparative? Try to analyze the both world in opposition and government and try to compare why their world comparatively is bad and it's better in our side of the house, right? So that is for reasoning. Lastly, about the link back, why your argument is relevant to the motion. You can have this by trying to link back and revert that this is the most important argument and this is the most important analysis that should be considered by judge. Why? Because blah 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 blah. So you are also in link back, you can also re-strengthen your previous speaker case and try to mention that you are referring towards the an idea established by your previous speaker, and this is what is more important in your speech, that you are trying to revert the content of that idea and adding a new and deeper analysis. So that's the link back that you can have. Try to mention which one of the fallacy of your opponents you are trying to destroy, and try to try to glorify why your case is important to be counted for the judge. That's for argument. Lastly, the last thing is responses. So in responses, I'm going to present that in responses we are going to have a rebuttal. The easiest way to ensure that you have provided a sufficient and clear rebuttal is to maybe, if it's a very direct rebuttal, just to place it in the beginning of your speech. But if you want to add it and integrate it in your classes, it's also going to be, it's also count as a response, right? So in rebuttal, you have three steps: trying to negate and trying to neutralize. Why is it not that exclusive in their side of the house, and try to say that it's also applicable in your case. So lastly, about the even if, trying to assume that even if their argument can work, their argument is that beneficial, their argument are going to be work in the way that they are trying to present, why then the outcome will be worse, why at the end eventually it's not going to be that beneficial. So lastly is framing, and framing is I think this is a good and simple way to shut your opponent's argument, even if their entire cases, their entire positive case sounds good. But if you try to frame that their case is not that important in the debate, you can easily shut down their case. So framing basically helps you to present issues that are more favorable towards your case, but is also debatable and also justified to be counted towards by judges. So frame can be a layer of rebuttal, A minus, inexclusive, and other even if. The famous frames most likely we can found and in debate circuit is that this debate is not about blah 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 blah. So opposition's benefit can only fly if they told you the analysis on why blah 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 is going to be happen. So you can also bring and frame that your own case is the most important thing and others is not. So that's all from debating seminar presented by May. We hope that this debating seminar is going to be a good step for you to conduct the competition by tomorrow. Thank you all.
Hi, May, you have one question. Could
Okay,
you please explain again about link back? I don't clearly understand about the point.
Okay, wait. So link back. Thank you for the question. Sorry, I don't see that question. Thank you from Muhammad Ilham Dirwan. So link back is basically a trying to you trying to mention your things in the case that you are trying to prove and try to remind the judge that this is why your case is important and this is why your team case is necessary towards the debate. So most likely in link back, you are trying to remind the judge that after your step-by-step analysis, after your deep analysis, trying to link back and trying to mention why then those kind of analysis, those kinds of characteristic is necessary and those kinds of analysis is important to be counted in this debate. So so the use of this link back is that trying to prove why it is the analysis that you have in your reasoning, this kind of reasoning is significant and is relevant to the motion and why judge should buy that kind of reasoning. So simply link back shows you and tell judge and alert judge that this is why your case is necessary and important towards the debate. I think that's the answer for the question by Ilham. Thank you, Ilham. Is there any other question? So should we move to other presentation by Kak Agnes and Kak Adam? Okay, thank you all. If there is no other questions, thank you for dealing with my presentation. Thank you.
Orcom, can I have access to share the screen? Oh, hi everyone. My name is Agnes. I'm from Venus and I'm also part of the education core. So while waiting for the organization, oh, they have given me. Okay, wait for a moment. I'll share my screen. So sorry. Can everyone see my screen? Share. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Sanas.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So, even for debaters, I really encourage all of you to join this session because you want to know whether or not your judge flop. And this is also very important on how you want to give scoring to the judge, to the chair in your particular room. So, mm, effective judging. What is effective judging? I think there are four main points. Number one, as a judge, you should not have any specific knowledge from your background, whether you are coming from a specific country and you use that knowledge to weigh the debate, or whether you have a specific knowledge in terms of your studies, like you studies in a major of international relation or politics or your profession, you should not include that when you judge in a debate. Number two, you are willing to be persuaded. It means that you do not directly give winning to the opening because they say it first, but you're willing to be persuaded by other kinds of framing, by other kinds of importance in the argumentation that all teams presented in the debate. Thirdly, you should not be an interventionalist. What is an interventionalist? Basically, you intervene in the debate. It's not just putting yourself and your specific knowledge, but intervening the debate can comes in form of making an argument for a team from the assertion that any of the team has presented in the debate. So do not put yourself in the debate. Do not assume that the speaker actually meant something from their speech unless it is really explicitly told by the speakers. So do not intervene in such a way. And the next thing is you are capable of understanding complex concepts, following and also understanding the debate. So we need you to make sure and check up on yourself whether or not you're capable of doing so. So that's how you have an effective judging, basically in 4 steps. But what is more important is why are we exactly doing this? Aside from debaters that I told you before, that we want to make sure that you are capable of assessing whether or not your judge is doing their job well in the room. But I think for judges, I think it's also very important to know that a job of a judge is pretty much like sex. Number one, the job of a judge is very risky and tricky because, as I mentioned, it requires you a deep understanding of a lot of issues. So make sure that you understand basic issues that are currently happening. Second, you might be familiar with one partner, just like sex, but not the other. So just like that debate, you might have judged Asian parliamentary, but this is different. This is BP, and judging BP is very unique, which I will explain later. And thirdly, you have to keep up. You have to keep up with the current standards, with the current trends that are currently happening. And let's move on. Okay, as a judge, please just don't. Number one, do not count arguments. Just because in the beginning of a speech, any speaker mentioned, I have 3 arguments in my speech, I have 4 rebuttals in my speech, and the other team only said, I have 2 arguments. You do not instantly make a team that mentioned they have 4 arguments in their speech win. Okay, that is not how it works. You need to see whether or not that arguments really have a true way in the debate and to the motion itself. Second, you do not give separate score for styles, accents, originality. Um, we might see in probably world schools, or we might see in other schools competition and other form of debate, they judge based on matter, manner, and also, just a speaking style. We do not do that in BP, so it doesn't matter if you have a different accent. It does not matter if you are not Indonesian. It does not matter. All of those things does not matter. What matters is your arguments in a debate, and judge should remember that. Cut and pay attention to your own bias. Third, you should not penalize a team for not taking POI or not rebutting argument directly. A team might rebut the argumentation from their arguments in it of itself, but they do not, brand it as a direct rebuttal to argumentation coming from their opening, for example. As a judge, you should pay attention to this. You should not directly penalize team just because they do not frame it as a direct rebuttal. And lastly, and importantly, you should not give an auto fort. Even if your opening government only speaks for like 1 minute, it does not mean that their closing will speak for over 1 minute with a better material. They might only come for 30 seconds and it's even worse. So you should not give auto fort. You still need to pay attention until the end of the debate. Okay, now please do these things in the debate. Number one, define your metrics when you are giving your judgment after the debate. For example, you want to give a team winning because they have more likelihood. Then you also need to impose the same burden to the other teams, why the likelihood of other teams are lacking, or why it's better in your closing, and so on and so forth. So define your metric, what you see is most important in this debate, and impose the same equal burden to all teams. You cannot just use one metric that benefits a team and does not impose the same thing to the other team. Okay, and lastly, decide team that has provided best justification. So it's not the amount of arguments, it's not the title of the arguments, it's not their style, but the justification in each argument. Next thing, common mistakes 101 by judges. The first common mistake is ability to analyze room of agreement. So we recognize there are 3 room of agreements in the debate, 3 types of room of agreements. Number 1 is what every teams in the room agree explicitly is true and important. So this can come in the form of direct negation, like we do agree that the livelihood of poor individuals is the most important. So this kind of flagging in their speech, so every team agree on this. Or their type number 2, which what teams implicitly agree. This can come in the form of the most discussed argumentation that being rebutted again and again by all of the teams. Or this can also come in form of framing of a team, the importance and constant rebuttal, basically constant discussion of this kind of argument. So this is the room that you should pay attention to. Or thirdly, even if there are no teams that truly say that explicitly, or there are no discussion that often came up in the debate, but a team actually brought up the idea that, okay, the room of agreement is X because X has 3 likelihoods why it's important, number 1, number 2, number 3. So a team has successfully managed to prove to you why that particular room of agreement is what is true and correct in the debate. So if there is no such types of room of agreement that you see in the debate, as a judge, we expect you to be an average reasonable voter. So you need to weigh yourself and give justification to why you think the judgment is based on that room of agreement at the end of the debate. Next, extension. What is an extension? I think May mentioned that an extension can come in many forms. It does not need to be completely new argument. So what is extension then? It is new rebuttal. You may add one analysis of rebuttal. You may add new framing. Why is this argument important? Why is this argument necessary in the debate? Why is this context is significant to the debate, you also may add new examples like new states, new study cases, which makes just makes new nuance in the debate. And then there are new ways of explaining similar idea. Okay, so there are a lot of ways of you creating an extension. An extension can also be a new idea, a whole new argument. For example, opening debates talk more about the principal argument, and right now you want to talk more about the impact, so that can also be counted as an extension. So it's just different, but not all argumentation is valued the same. Just because, for example, Team A brought the idea on context specifically on Southeast Asian countries, and then closing brought the ideas of probably Latin American countries. Just because you add new example does not necessarily mean that you have an extension that could be weighed the same with your opening. So as a judge, you need to see whether or not this specific extension is something that you can consider as a completely new argument that can trump over the openings and vice versa. That is the job of the judge, and you need to value it in the debate. So the question is, what is a valuable extension? It varies in the motion. For example, you want to weigh based on the parameter of a greater impact. You want to weigh based on the protecting more vulnerable actor, or a good extension is an extension that has more step-by-step analysis, because that is what necessary in this debate. So it's very different according to the debate and what the motion demands. So as a judge, it is your job to identify what is new and weigh how valuable an extension is. Diagonals. Do take considerations that as a team, as an opening team, they are not capable of responding on directly see or predict what is the closing team's argument going to be. Or opening teams are not capable, or you also need to pay attention that even if opening teams are not capable of predicting all of these materials coming from closing, opening still can accept POIs. So even if we do not penalize not taking POIs, but POIs is also part of response. So you still also need to consider that in your head that, okay, the reason why closing argumentation might seem so new is because opening do not give them any chance to raise any POI during the speech. And you see that in the debate, they are not giving any space. But you also need to consider the robustness of the opening case. So opening should predict what closing case might be, although it's not entirely their burden. So if something is completely new, you still need to consider that opening might be able to predict that, whether or not the argument is predictable, or whether or not it is not at all opening burden because the material is just completely new in the closing side. You may credit opening team's material, which implicitly responsive to the closing material, but you should not intervene any further. For example, there are examples that are already mentioned by opening and that can actually direct it towards the closing extension or the closing argumentation. You may credit this as a material and respond, but you should not make a whole new argumentation that is not there to begin with. Next type of penalties. Again, there is still no auto fault in the debate. You still need to judge the debate holistically, but basically there are these types of penalties that we give in a team. Number one, contradiction. Many of the judges are confused, probably what kind of contradiction and how big contradiction actually affect the judgment of a judge. So basically first, what we encourage you to do is assess the rest of the argument aside from the contradiction in and of itself first. But second, you also need to then assess how important is that contradiction to the rest of the argument. For example, a team is saying that they can benefit some amount of individuals in the debate, but at the end of their speech, then they say there is going to be a certain harm imposed to particular individuals. So that's form of contradiction. So are you going to help that individuals or you are not going to help that individuals? So you may assess that differently, or if you think that is a huge contradiction, a huge part of the debate, then you can penalize these things. Number two, new argumentation and whip. Identify what is really new. As we told you, new extension is not new. New framing, new urgency, new framing, basically new framing, new significance is not completely new material. It's just a framing. But completely new argumentation is when a whip brought up a principal argument that never even started to begin with from the start of this debate, or whip speaker say that they could actually benefit X individuals that their member never mentioned. So that is what is really new. Your job as a judge is to identify what is really new and what is not new. Wait a moment, I need to charge my laptop. Okay. The next thing is squirreling. So what is squirreling? Squirreling is basically definition. This is probably what happened lunch from the opposition side of the house. Basically, for example, this house will ban cars, then opening government said that, okay, the kind of cars that we want to ban is only Mercedes-Benz, or the kind of cars they want to ban is only from Suzuki or Toyota. That is squirreling, and it makes the debate unfair to the other teams to explore. So you need to assess how big the squirreling has impacted the debate, and also assess the rest of the argumentation coming from that team to justify that. If you think that's very much and that's very impactful to your arguments, basically they do not have any argument that is separate from their squirreling, you can penalize that team. Scoring. So I encourage judges, especially in the judge, this is your first or second time judging, please screenshot this, or you can actually see it later on. We will share this. I'll just move on. So basically the average for BP is 75. Good average is around 77, 78. Okay, so how do we do feedback in this tournament? In this tournament, we are going to have feedbacks for trainee, panel, and chair. Chair can give feedback to panel. Chair can give feedback to trainee. Panel to chair. Debater to chair. The scoring range is as such. If debaters give 1 or 2 to their chair, which the one who are going to give oral adjudication, that is the direct complaint, we will approach you. Adjudication core will approach you later on through chat, and we will ask you why you give that score, what is very impactful, and you need to give your justification. So if there's no justification, we will still consider that the particular person or individual who chaired the room might do something bad, but if you do not give an if you give the justification, it might then impact the next round that the chair is doing. The time that every judge is going to have in this debate is 15 minutes to deliberate, but we encourage you to do shorter times, but we do understand sometimes it's just very hard. So make sure you use your rights as a judge to vote or to lead the conversation, and then 10 minutes for verbal. Because this is an online tournament, we encourage judges to give feedback after the rounds, but you need to first let the ORCOM know that you have finished your adjudication and do the feedback either in your previous room if ORCOM has not moved you yet to the main room, or you can do it through Facebook. So make sure that you are reachable basically through many platforms in social media. Also important in this tournament specifically, we are going to encourage you to use a proper gender pronouns. So before the round starts, as a judge, as a chair, you're encouraged to ask every individuals in your room their preferred gender pronouns. This includes all chair, debaters, panels, trainees. We do not want any individuals to be mispronounced. So to make it simpler, we thought that maybe you could distribute chat box a form to fill by everyone in the room. For example, like what I show you in the screen. And lastly, that's all. Thank you. Is there any question? Thank you. You love the slide. Yes, me too. That dog scares me. I'm sorry. They're cute. Question. Could you please provide an example of how contradiction look like and how to judge it? Okay, how contradiction look like and how to judge it. I think one of the contradiction that I can think of is when at them in the beginning, they say that they're going to protect, for example, poor individuals in a community. But at the end, moving along in the speech, they mention that, yeah, some part of that individuals is going to be harmed by our proposal. So it's not fully protecting that individuals, but rather they say that there's a certain amount of harm. So it become questioning whether or not you are going to protect that individuals or that actor that you say in the beginning of your speech, or you're going to impose harm. So the way to look at it is to see first whether or not the argument about that specific individual is going to be protected is achievable. Then you can see, oh, what it means by imposing certain harms is in the worst case scenario, they're going to impose that harm, even if it doesn't work. So that is not a full contradiction, but the framing from the team makes it like a contradiction. So that's why we see first and we separate first the part that we think as a contradiction at the end, but we see the whole picture so we know whether or not it really means a contradiction. Other form of example, let me think. If Adam and me has any idea or any of you has example, then it's very open. We're going to answer that. I'm just thinking of an example. I'm going to answer the next question first as we think of a new example. Can the web speakers improve, elaborate the examples, the analysis of the points delivered by the member? Yes, of course, because if a web speaker is not being, if we do not allow any web speakers to improve the argumentation given by their members, I don't know what web speakers should do. There's just like, very small room of web speakers. So as a web, what they expect you to do is basically, as May mentioned probably in her seminar, you can weigh which argument really matters, which issues really matters in this debate, and why your team has given that, has proved that. Or as a whip, you can also, exactly like what mentioned by Akbar, you can improve and elaborate more of the examples. For example, your member actually mentioned about study case, what happened in Thailand for, I don't know what debate. And then you further elaborate that as a whip. You want to add what is the context specific of Thailand, how it works in Thailand, how people interact in Thailand, and why that matters to the debate. That is an elaboration that we still consider and we still count in the debate because your member already mentioned the example of Thailand. So that's not completely new. The elaboration is not completely new. What is completely new is, for example, you bring the argumentation of, like I mentioned, like a principle or an impact that is completely new in your web speaker that is not going to be considered in the debate. But then again, you need to see how the debate goes. Is it really a new argumentation, or is it a rebuttal? Is it a response? Or is it actually an extension of what the member has proven in the debate? If that explains, I hope it explains. Perhaps the ones who give question can answer whether or not it's enough. If it's not, then I can give other type of examples. Is there any other question? Or if the examples that I have given enough or not, because if not, I'm going to look for more examples. If it's enough, then we're going to move on to the exhibition result. Question: when the speaker speaks very fast, how to not lose track of them? Okay, so for this question in particular, I think it really depends for its judge. My tip will probably write as much as you can. That's style number one. Or style number two, try to really listen what the speakers mean in their speech, then write that in your notes. So probably you are the type who can follow very fast and type very fast, then you do number one. But if you are the type of you need to understand the whole picture first and then take a note, then take that notes. But we want to make sure that you listen to every word that the speaker actually mentioned, the example, so that you consider and you count that in your speech. The other step is also to encourage debaters not to be very fast, because you want to make sure that you listen to them very well. I hope that answers. Next question, as a whip, is it okay if I explain some points that opening bench already bring in their argument? Yes, as we mentioned that extension does not have to be a completely new argumentation. An extension can also be framing. So for example, your opening mentioned the analysis of how they would want to improve the political system in Indonesia, let's say. As a closing, you can say that, okay, we know that opening government brought the ideas that they want to improve the political system in Indonesia. But what opening never show in this debate is the step-by-step analysis how that can happen. So as closing, our extension is going to fill that gap, because unless opening has proven this, their arguments cannot run. So that is how you make their argument become yours by adding an extension as closing. Next question, if we, the judge, haven't reached consensus after 15 minutes, what the chair and panel should do? The chair and panel should vote. I think if you have not reached it in 15 minutes. So in voting, usually we see, okay, for example, the type, what you are confused most is about opening government versus opening opposition, then you're just going to vote on that. But if everyone is completely different and no one is willing to you know um, confer to each other's result, then we also encourage you as a chair to lead the conversation and to lead the voting system. For example, which give closing government the highest rank, which give the opening government the highest rank, and then you can start voting from that. So basically, usually we count the one with highest one among each other, but usually it should not be that much of a difference. If we need to vote and chair is rolled, should the panel deliver the OA? Yes, if the chair is rolled out and um, the panel should only give the OA afterwards of the chair. I think if wait, let me make it clear. So in BP, because there are 4 teams, obviously there are cases where a chair have a different look of all 4 with the panels. But I don't think I never found any debate so far which 4 results is completely different with the panels. I think the chair should still deliver the OA, but later on, when there is a split, you can mention that this split, I think you can ask further feedback from the panels, but chairs still need to deliver their OAs and the result coming from the panels. So chairs still need to mention in their OA why the panels think that the winner is X and not Y, even if the chair is rolled out. Adam or May, any of you want to add? Chair, because this is a mutual feedback system, basically your panel can give you score. So we also encourage chair to be inclusive to their panels. Panels, you have power over your chair to give that score to your chair as well. So make sure that your chair is doing their job to include you in the discussion. And chair, you are also giving score to trainees. So make sure that you listen to your trainees because they are trying to improve themselves here. So we encourage you to do so. Any more questions? No more question. Okay, we can continue to the exhibition results. If you have more question, you can drop it in the question box, and then we'll answer that at the end of the exhibition seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. Am I audible?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna try to share the screen real quick. Is it visible? My screen?
It's still on the way.
Ah, okay. Is it still not loading?
Yep, we can see it now.
You can see it now? Okay, cool. So apologies in advance that my slide isn't as cute as Agnes's and not as fancy as May's. I just, did what I could with what limited skills I have, but hopefully the contents will be satisfactory for the purposes of this exit results announcement. Cool. So we're going to structure this exit results announcement much like a verbal, basically. First part, we're going to give like general comments regarding how we thought the debate went, what could have been improved, for example. Secondly, we're going to get to the call. Thirdly, we're going to discuss why the positions were ranked as such. And lastly, we're going to justify the scoring that we gave to each speaker and also tell you what each speaker got as a speaker point. So yeah, as always, and first of all, we're going to go to general comments. We have a couple of points of general comments in this debate. The first one, we felt that there was a general existence of incomplete setups in the debate from a bunch of sides, a bunch of sides in the House, for example. So the set of mechanisms implemented in the debate constantly shifted from team to team, both in terms of like the form that it takes, but also how draconian the policy is going to look like when it is implemented. And I think that that is something that was largely confusing for the adjudicators to sort of like weigh, because a lot of the harms were tied to how much of a stressful situation this is going to be for the people who are religious, for example, or for the people who subscribe to a particular religion. So the fact that there wasn't a constant or a consistent impact because of the mechanism that existed rather hampered the debate and rather made it difficult for consensus to happen in the debate. There was also a lack of discussion in the opening bench regarding what it means to decolonize and what role religion plays in it. And I felt that, and we felt that because it is a very prominent word in the motion, it should have been a very large group for you to be able to discuss and sort of like dissect what this topic necessarily wants you to discuss, for example. And the fact that it was largely brushed over in the opening debate made it very easy for closing teams, for example, to sort of like fill in the gaps and kind of like put their own spin on the motion. That was quite difficult in terms of extension in comparison to the opening. The impact that this has on the debate is that it became difficult for the debate to come to a consensus on the context in which the debate takes place as well. And we felt that that further confused the panel of adjudicators, for example, and made the debate less desirable than it could have been. But the second point of general comments as well is that there was a lack of explicit and successful frames that were brought by each team, because opening bench, if you notice in the debate, largely talks about the private sphere of individuals and why their right to religion ought to be preserved. The difference was in the government, it was the right of religion for marginalized religions that were sort of like deleted or swept over by the colonial religion. So they were talking about Javanese Islam or Javanese Christianity, for example, things of that nature. Whereas opening opposition talk a little more about the how the colonialist religion themselves have eventually become a minority, and they're the ones who are now vulnerable, and they're the ones whose rights we need to be protecting, for example. In comparison, the closing bench talks a lot about the role of religion. CG talking a lot about how the religion might carry in a tool to justify invasion and things of that nature, for example. Whereas opposition talked about how in order for you to be able to carry out a peaceful of decolonization, you need to not anger the religious figures in your society, for example, because that's going to lead to conflict and an undesirable outcome. Because there is no direct comparison of importance between these two issues, it became difficult to weigh which one was necessarily more important, because of the top two teams in the debate, we felt that there weren't significant problems with proving why it's true, for example, or why the harms that they claimed were manifested did occur. But unfortunately, because it was very tight on that regard, it needed to have a tipping point with regard to which one we need to prioritize, for example. So if I were the opening bench, for example, and I wanted to make the debate talk about more about the individual right to religion, for example, I would talk about how decolonization in spirit and as an end goal has the goal of granting liberty to a community that was previously oppressed, to an individual that was previously oppressed, for example. That's why, in order for you to properly carry out the principle of decolonization, because you would argue that it's a, for example, communities that have been under oppression of decolonization for so long are probably still feeling the aftershocks of that impact right now. It needs to be done in a principally correct manner, and that needs to not exclude, for example, the most marginalized groups that are currently existing within that community. As closing, I would probably talk a little more about why the process of decolonization is sort of like the first step for you to be able to practice your religious rights in a free manner, for example, and the lack of a successful decolonization process is eventually going to be harmful also for the goals of opening teams. So, for example, that would have been frames that have made much more explicit in the debate, would have made the call much more easier. So the results are as follows. First goes to closing opposition, second goes to opening opposition, third goes to closing government, and lastly goes to fourth goes to opening government, and they're the following reasons. So the way that I'm sort of going to structure this verbal is indicative of how Indonesian judges generally do it, which is you go from fourth to first. So you compare fourth to third, third to second, second to first. Just a note for any adjudicators, independents, for example, or invited adjudicators, if you're watching this, this is not necessarily something that you need to do as well. You can sort of just take the style that you're most comfortable with. If that means that you're going to go first to fourth, for example, or you're going to do a bench split first, and then you explain why opening bench one over closing bench, and then compare government to opposition, things of that nature. It's completely up to you. So just as a heads up, this is not something that you need to do necessarily as well. So in comparing the third team and the fourth team, so OG versus CG, opening government talks a lot about the unjustifiable methods that were utilized by the colonizers to spread their religion, and the believers of minority religions being thoroughly oppressed and deplatformed. So they are talking about the Javanese Islam and the Javanese Christianity, for example, and why they do not have any access or platform or any way for them to access salvation, because they argue under opening government, in order for you to access salvation, a lot of religions demand you to do a lot of preaching and convert a lot of people to your religion, for example. Whereas on closing government, they talk about the overlapping of religion and politics, and colonial religions particularly, now it has implications on unity and why it's harmful to fair politics in the nation in which it is present. So both teams in the debate were able to identify a problem and were able to very well establish an urgency as to why that problem needs to be addressed, but had significant challenges in being able to analyze the process properly, for example. So open government, for example, in order for them to be able to bring forward the idea of a vulnerable religious community who are completely disenfranchised, who are unable to exercise their religious rights and are unable to commune, for example, they had to be able to first tackle the contextualization brought by team opening opposition that this is most likely a post-colonial society that already has a plethora of choices available for people and generally accept that religion is something that you should be free to adopt to your own preferences, for example. And because OG unfortunately does not attempt to engage to that contextualization coming by from OO, and they also did not sort of like bring their own context with regard to what the world that they envisioned this debate would take place in looks like, unfortunately was unable to make that urgency fly under their side of the house. They were also unable to explain how their quite soft model of taking away like certain holidays, for example, or replacing Sunday sermons with certain more minority religions, we're going to be able to significantly persuade people and to more pursue indigenous religion, for example. And because that process analysis was missing, unfortunately, OG was unable to significantly establish a position in the debate. In comparison, closing government also relies, unfortunately, on a tenuous premise that colonial religions overlap with politics to prove a bunch of narratives based harms, such as white savior narrative, for example, or how this is going to make the political sphere much more hierarchical and much more identitarian. Unfortunately, each of these claims were based only on that premise, and each of them had very small additional elaboration to back those claims up, while they were very big claims and required a significant amount of proving. That being said, closing government did win over opening government for three distinct reasons. The first reason is that opening government's context of there being a massive disenfranchisement against the minority religion is unfortunately locked out of the debate, because opening opposition asserted their context that this is a relatively more peaceful society now that does not oppress a particular religion. And I think that closing benches generally agree to operate under that assumption as well, especially closing government's arguments regarding political access is able to operate under opposition's context. And so unfortunately, opening government's context, which was left out in the debate, and their entire case, which relied upon that context being true, was unable to win over closing government, who ended up being more relevant in the debate because of that. The second reason why closing government won over OG is because their solvency is likelier, because OG does not at all explain how their proposed mechanisms will be able to solve the problem. In fact, they didn't have mechanisms in the prime minister, for example. It was only sort of like sprinkled around in deputy prime minister, and unfortunately, because it got so little airtime, there wasn't any time for them to explain what the implication of that mechanism is likely to be. Comparatively, closing government's explanation regarding why things like white savior narrative and historical baggage can be solved by you disempowering the influence of a certain religion in that political sphere, for example, and by discouraging candidates of that religion from applying based on their religion, for example, using identitarian politics, was much more well elaborated and therefore more believable in the debate. So the solvency of the problem that they outlined was more intact in closing government. The third reason why closing government won over OG was just a better frame that they utilized in answering the debate, because they were the team that brought an explicit frame of why the public sphere is much more important to the debate than the private sphere, by piggybacking on the opening opposition's context of things being relatively more peaceful. That means that individuals are generally able to access their religion at the very least privately, so it's not an urgent need for them to, like, the moment that they don't do this, they are unable to connect with their ancestors, things of that nature. I thought that was able to diminish the importance of having a religion that was highly practicable or highly spreadable, which was the goal of opening government. So yeah, that for those reasons, closing government won over opening government. Secondly, in comparing closing government and opening opposition to the third ranked team and the second ranked team. Opening opposition to the debate, the new player, as far as this verbal goes, talks mainly about the disenfranchisement of those who already subscribe to the the colonial religion, which has now become a minority religion, with much of the rest being direct contention to OG instead of wholly positive case. So in comparing the positive case of OO and closing government, we came to a conclusion that opening opposition wins over closing government. And the tipping point are threefold. The first one was that CG tried in the very beginning of their speech to dismiss OO's importance by sort of saying that there was a generation in the past that were forcefully that was forced to shift their religion to something else, and therefore it is now possible as well for the current generation to undergo something like that. And it's possible for them to come out of this intact, for example. We felt that this was something that was quite assumptive. That's to say, there's no explanation regarding why there's a continuity of traits between generation to generation, for example, and why things are likely to fold out the same. And given how big of an assumption this was, we felt that it needed significant elaboration in order for it to be able to apply, unfortunately. And so the dismissal we did not buy necessarily coming from closing government. Yeah. Secondly, while closing government's frame of personal access to religion being accessible also weakened opening opposition's importance, just like how it weakened opening government's importance, their process analysis was significantly weaker than opening on opposition, unfortunately. Because where closing government relied on a single line of premise that, the religion, the colonial religion, was utilized as a justification for invasion, and therefore it's going to share the same traits, it's going to create a hierarchy, things of that nature. It was quite a thin premise to extrapolate on, whereas opening opposition was able to elaborate very deeply on why it's likely that their problem of minorities being disenfranchised or the colonial religion being disenfranchised is something that exists, for example, because they were not the ones who are seen as heroes. The majority religion was seen as heroes because they were the one who resisted the colonial oppression, for example, and how they currently have a lack of civil protection because the policemen, when they come to see the church burning, they don't do anything about it, for example. And I felt that there was no response from CG to the opening opposition's principle of when states are allowed to intervene. They talked at length about why about how the spreading of religion was not at all predicated upon the state's intervention, and so how it spreads in the future and how it's controlled must also not be left to the state, for example. There was no response to this bit at all, which further solidified opening opposition's win over closing government. The last clash was between opening opposition and closing opposition, with opening opposition ranking second and closing opposition ranking first. So opening opposition and closing opposition both very successfully materialized their harms in the debate, with OO saying that the private comfort and spiritual connection of individuals will be devastated because of the existence of this policy, and closing opposition argued that division would become incredibly prominent with this, not with this religion, but with this policy of, micromanaging each of these religions. Because of their convincing harms and a general lack of hints from both opening opposition and closing opposition, this became a very close call, but eventually we did give the win to closing opposition. The tipping point is as follows. The first one is that opening opposition unfortunately took their setting rather for granted, that this is already a very peaceful society where religions in general are considered valid and considered something that you should be free to opt into. Whereas closing opposition talked more about how we're still in the midst of a decolonialization process, and that very process is something that can be harmed the moment that you go with government's proposal, for example. So, given that opening opposition's arguments relied on the existence of a peaceful society and a successful decolonialization process, and closing opposition provided the prerequisite to that, which is that the decolonization is going to be successful under CO. Therefore, closing opposition was able to triumph over opening opposition because their argument was the prerequisite for opening opposition's argument to become true as well. The second tipping point was in terms of urgency, because closing teams in the debate were able to explain that personal exercise of religious freedom is still possible, which diminishes the harm of opening opposition, but why CG was unable to triumph over OO, but CO was able to triumph over OO was because CG's harm of division was significantly less proven than OO's harms. As we previously talked about, there was just not as much elaboration, and they did not go as deep in terms of elaboration in comparison to OO, but CO, their depth of elaboration was very deep indeed. When they actually, I kind of forgot the particular points, but I'm sure it's down there in Meryl's individual assessment, and we're going to explore that later. But in terms of just the depth of elaboration, I think that CEO successfully contested OO. So when it became a matter of strategy as a tipping point, closing opposition was able to win over opening opposition, and that is why the debate ranked as such. So we're moving on to the scores now, with Prime Minister getting 74. The pros of Prime Minister's speech is that firstly, they were able to explain with some degree of success that the methods utilized to convert people to their religion were largely unjustifiable. they also successfully introduced a possible scenario where the leaders are corrupt, with the very large harm of people continuing to be pressured and being forced even today during the decolonialization process, for example. Unfortunately, the second argument, the likelihood, was rather underexplained. Like, why is the scenario of there being corrupt leaders particularly likely in the case of opposition was never necessarily explained, and so it wasn't able to be credited as much as probably they would have wanted it to. The minuses of prime minister's speech is that the setup, in particular the mechanism of the debate, were missing, and that harmed the case significantly because the feasibility of their arguments were sort of undercut by that absence, and unfortunately that did harm their case by quite a significant margin. But secondly, and perhaps more fatally, the process analysis of how the state's intervention will achieve OG's desired outcome was missing in the entirety of this speech. So therefore, when they claimed like there's a problem, here's going to be a benefit, the link between that is missing. I cannot credit the benefit, and thus Prime Minister could only get as high as 74. Moving on to the opposition bench, we have Leader of Opposition with 75. The pros of Leader of Opposition are the following. They were able to assert a new context, which is decolonization period, that diminished the urgency of opening government for people to have choices because they already have choices in the status quo, for example. And they were also able to successfully rebut the inherited from colonials argument from PM by proving that the religions have already been absorbed and modified to fit the local culture. It's been sort of like remodeled to suit their current needs. Unfortunately, in Leader of Opposition, they were unable to establish a clear link in principle because they had a principle argument that was relatively thick, but it was sort of all over the place because they started by saying Islam spread through trading and religion is a safe space, therefore the state does not have the right to intervene. This seemed rather isolated pieces rather than a coherent whole. Unfortunately, although it's possibly intuitive, if you make sort of like a connect the dots situation with it, it was heavily under elaborated and thus cannot be credited as much. The second reason why Leader of Opposition could not go higher than 75 is that there was no likelihood analysis on why conflict will happen, because that was the entirety of their second argument, that they feared conflict a lot. But unfortunately, it was sort of like a harm that was just thrown out there. No likelihood analysis was given, and thus they cannot go higher than 75. Deputy Prime Minister, 76. The positives of deputy prime minister is that they firstly significantly expanded upon the influence of colonizers on people's religions, and as a consequence that limits their choices. So they were the one who sort of brought this principle of maximizing choices to a conclusion. And OG, they were also able to successfully assert a new vulnerable actor, those being Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, so sorry about that. We'll pick up where we left off. Okay. Um, the screen. Yeah. Cool. So we move on to wait. Yeah. So I think we finished with Deputy Prime Minister. We're now going to move on to Deputy Leader of Opposition, and with a score of 79. The reason why the score is very high is because of the following reasons. There were three positives that we generally identified within the Deputy Leader of Opposition speech. The first thing was that they successfully engaged with Deputy Prime Minister on the issue of availability of choice, mainly by proving that minority colonial religions are more vulnerable and therefore need to be protected. And I think that the depth of collaboration was quite significant there. And yeah, the engagement was very much successful in comparison to in clashing with opening government, for example. The second thing that was in their favor was they expanded on the implications of opening opposition's context of decolonization, i.e., they were able to sort of like gave logical scenarios that if people were forced to join this religion to begin with, they would have accepted the religion the moment that the colonialists lost power. The fact they stuck with that religion even after the colonialists are gone, for example, proves that they were genuinely attached to that religion and have made it something that they can survive on and something that they genuinely cherished, for example. The third thing is that they elaborated on why the state ought not intervene in religious matters because they have no influence in the spreading of religion being a private safe space, things of that nature. Again, something that was never rebutted by the entirety of government bench. What was not in the deputy leader of opposition's favor, however, is that firstly, there was no link back to or framing against the importance of decolonization process. And I think that this is a very unfortunate downfall because eventually this was something that was utilized by opposing opposition in order to win the debate as a whole. And the fact that opening opposition sort of missed the chance to exploit that keyword in the motion kind of spelled their doom in this debate, unfortunately. The second reason why DLO cannot go higher than 79 is because the importance, the layer of importance of why the personal access to religion is so important. It's very thin under them, possibly because of time management issues as well. But unfortunately, there were not a significant amount of like importance here that the adjudicators recorded enough for them to win over the closing opposition, for example. Yeah. So DLO 79. We move on to member of government was 77. What were in his favor were that he successfully mapped the debate in a very holistic manner and established a very strong new identity that you needed, that you don't necessarily interfere with people's individual access to this colonial religion, but you want to limit the access of the colonial religion to a political platform, for example. And I think this was very clearly established. They also established a clear urgency regarding the loss of the country's capability to self-determine their identity and political system, which might lead to identitarian division, as well as a lot of case studies. I believe the example utilized was Rwanda, for example, to the extent that the urgency felt very clear in his speech. What wasn't in his favor, unfortunately, was that there were firstly, they were unsuccessful in dismissing the urgency of opening opposition, that the country has shifted religions before and it can now do so again. We've kind of already talked about this earlier, but yeah, that was unsuccessful. But secondly, and perhaps more fatally, is that there was a tenuous link established between the narratives that happen in religion and the political system beyond the thesis that religion and politics overlap, because that's how the colonialists made it. I think we would have appreciated a much thicker process of elaboration in order for such a grand idea to be able to fly, for example, and that was not achieved. And member of government speech, hand 77 is as high as they could go. Member of opposition, 75. The reason why they were able to get 75 is that they successfully asserted a new goal of unity and forming of a strong collective identity. We understand that much of the explanations were quite similar to what was brought by opening opposition, but we thought that the link back to creating a sort of like national nation building identity was something that was quite fresh, and the link back was much clearer in member of opposition, for example, in comparison to uh, opening opposition, and because of that, they had a very significant, meaningful contribution in the debate. But secondly, they were also able to illustrate the possibility of coexistence through representation They talked about, I believe, Christian representative in parliament who changed the first Pancasila and things of that nature, for example. Unfortunately, what sort of damped their score and could made them could not go higher is that there was very weak direct rebuttals to closing government, which were generally relatively jargonistic, i.e. they said that it's better to give access because we want to empower all religions, which was, yeah, it just sounded utopic with no real practical implications that we could weigh against other teams, for example. Also, their first substantive is entirely repetitive of opening opposition. Of opening opposition. So unfortunately, we could not credit her higher than 75. Government Whip 76. They successfully solidified the harm of identitarian politics and explained how it would hamper nation building. So, whereas the member of government were sort of explaining why the harm of identitarian politics could happen. They were the ones who necessarily impacted it to the lowest level, for example, and how that would look in their day-to-day scenario, how it could hamper the economy, things of that nature. They were also able to broaden the case study of losing government by inserting as well the case of Sudan, which was quite an interesting case study, for example. Unfortunately, they could not go higher because they do not identify the weak points of member of government speech and do not solidify it further, which is proving that the problem of the religion and the politics being so intertwined is true. They also did not provide a meaningful response to OSPOI, which was quite sharp in questioning why, if the government is as colonial as CG claim, why then is there a sudden impetus for this motion to take the floor, for example? So yeah, because of these reasons, they could not go higher than 76. Moving on to opposition whip and the best speaker of the debate, they scored 80 because of the following reasons. The first positive is that they provided an in-depth likelihood analysis on how religion is spread, an issue that was brought since OG and was generally deadlocked throughout the debate. They were able to prove rather compellingly that a lot of people in these when they first encounter the religion would rather die than convert religion. So most likely the people who do subscribe to that religion are people who genuinely believe in the doctrines, for example. They also expanded upon opening opposition's idea of power imbalance between religions, or when they told us regarding the momentum that is generated when you declare independence, for example, that in that particular moment there's a massive demonization of colonialism, and that's exactly the mood that you take into the next phase, which is decolonization process, for example. And lastly, a positive and a negative is that they were able to assert an important frame that unity is the prerequisite to all other benefits a nation can pursue. Unfortunately, they were only able to give a direct comparison to closing government, who claimed the benefit of things like economy, for example, and they successfully were able to prove that economy can only benefit of personal access to religion. We felt that if the framing had been a little more holistic towards all benches that debate, they could have. Very clear. Okay. I'm gonna count to like, I don't know, like 10, okay, just to make sure there's no strugglers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, thank you very much. I'll pass it on to the committee.
So hello everyone, this is the approval status of NOVES applications in HBP 2020. We have received about 50 NOVES applications, and we end with this approval status. So we have 5 names to get an interview at 6 to 7 p.m. GMT 7 Jakarta. We are going to share the Zoom meeting link to do the interview later by Orcom in participant groups. So maybe Orcom can scroll slowly the tables of this novice application so people can see. And later on, we are also going to forward this to participant group so you can see that your name is there and you get an approval for the novice application status. Will be shared the initial result. No, but I think no, but at the end of the tournament, we are also going to release the internal. Yes, the internal accurate result in Heroku tab, so you can see. You can see your initial scores in Heroku at the end of the tournament. So yeah, disclaimer, this novice application have some errors due to some individuals enters the same name for like 3 to 4 times. So it's actually okay, but if you found some confusing approval status, we are going to fix that. This 5 is the one who are going to be interviewed by ACOR at 6 till 7 p.m. So other than that, we are also going to fix this later on before we. Yes. You may approach any of HCOR members for the novice application that is fixed. So one of the novice application submit that maybe one of their names is having a yes status and one of them having an interview status. We are going to fix that later before we forward it in the participants group. So yeah. Kak Agnes and Kak Adam, is there any information that you want to add?
Just want to remind everyone to not be late for tomorrow because online debate is very tiring time. So we can start on time and then you can have a rest for the next day. We're going to have 2 silent rounds as well for tomorrow. It's on round 3 and round 4. Make sure your teammate is also on time. I think for me, that's all. See you tomorrow.
Thank you all. See you tomorrow.
Thanks for the ACOR. Now we are moving on. We will conduct our last agenda for today, 20. I invite Aldi as the person in charge to take the lead. The technical guidelines. Yes.
Secondary platform is Discord. Okay, so moving on. What should you do? So first, you can download Zoom and Discord apps on your device. Okay. Okay, this is the check-ins. Okay, I'm sorry, wait for a moment. Okay, sorry for the disturbance. Let us continue for the explanation. What should you do? First, you could download Zoom and Discord apps on your device. It is available on the App Store, and you can also get it on Google Play. If you're using web or you're using a laptop or PC, you can access zoom.us and discord.com. Second is that you can log into Zoom and Discord apps using your account. Next. Okay, and how about the D-Day? Okay, okay, check-ins. All participants have their own personalized step link site. This personalized step link site can be used for check-in. The steps are pretty easy. First, you just have to open the link, and second, you can click check-in. That's all you have to do for the check-in, guys. Okay. For draw and motion release, the draw and motion will be shared to all participants in Tabbycat and Zoom. The draw tells you which team you are versing, what side you are, and what room you are. Second thing is that after the draw goes up, you will need to change your username on Zoom to include the room number that matches the draw. Okay, this is your format name on debate. Before joining the debate room on Zoom, you have to make sure that you change your name following this format. If you are in round 2 with room 4, for example, it would look like this. If you are a debater, then the display name should be in this format, round underscore room, and then team dash name. You can see for the example. If you're an adjudicator, the format is as follows: round underscore room, and then ADG, short for adjudicator, dash name. You can see the example. The debater will be given 5 minutes to rename themselves before entering breakout room. The motion release will not be continued until all the participants rename their name. So please, we emphasize all debaters, all participants, and adjudicators to uh, pay attention towards your display name at all times, at all round. So the moment you see the draw, you should change your rename, and you should rename yourself quickly. Okay, next. Okay, next thing is about breakout room. First, you have to join the debate main hall room on Zoom by the invitation link from the committee. It will be sent through your WhatsApp group. After that, each team and judge will rename themselves and be assigned into a breakout room by the host. And lastly, you should receive a pop-up on your screen inviting you to join a breakout room. The breakout room is where the debate will take place. Okay. Moving on to the debate. The debate proceeds on Zoom as a debate normally would. We highly encourage the debaters to keep their camera on during speech. When other debaters are delivering the argument or it's not your turn to speak, you have to mute your microphone. POIs are allowed to be voiced with the condition that it should not overbear the speaker's voice. And lastly is that if one member of the team drops out and cannot get back in a reasonable amount of time, one member of that team is allowed to iron person or deliver multiple speeches. Okay. Deliberation. Once the debate is over, the adjudicator or adjudicators will deliberate. If it is a solo chair, the judge should simply mute their audio and video and come to a decision. Once that is done, just unmute and deliver the oral adjudication. If there is a panel, all speakers should leave the breakout room by clicking Leave Breakout Room on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Crucially, when the pop-up appears, click Return to Main Session. Do not click Leave Meeting. I repeat, do not click Leave Meeting. You should click Leave Breakout Rooms. Lastly, this will take you back to the main room. Once the decision is made, the committee will call you back to your respective rooms. To return to the breakout room, you could click on the breakout rooms button on the bottom taskbar and follow the options to return. Ballot submission and feedbacks. Important note for judges, fill out your online ballot before delivering the oral adjudication. All adjudicators will receive a designated URL for ballot submission. In approaching the tournament, we are only accepting online ballots via Tabicat or Heroku. Do cross-check on all the information on the ballot to ascertain it is filled correctly. We highly advise teams to do feedback on the judge as soon as possible. The committee will give you an online form to fill the debaters' feedback on Discord main channel. Do it quickly, or give it in other platforms so that the host can soon close the breakout rooms and prepare for the next debate. Okay, technical problems. Okay, if you have attended the connection check a few days ago, then you will remember this. There are three situations about technical problems. First, if a speaker is disconnect or is incomprehensible, the chair's timer is going to be paused. The speaker is allowed to use the reminder of their speech if they're written within a reasonable time. Second, if the speaker cannot return, another member of the team may step up and deliver the reminder of the speech. And lastly, if chair disconnects in the middle of the debate should pause immediately and stay paused until the chair returns. If the chair does not return within 5 minutes, a member of the debate should contact the host in the main room. Okay, and that is all for the technical briefing. Do we have any questions from the participants? I'm sorry, but when do we need to do the check-in exactly?
Can I answer this, Arashi?
Oh yeah, you can, please.
Uh, uh, check-in will be most likely open by an hour before we start the round. So make sure. So we are also in tap team. We are going to inform that you need to check in through group participants, and you just can directly go to your personalized link to tap your check-in so that your status in Heroku app will be changed into checked in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kak Melinda. During re-registration time, 4 seconds. Yeah. I hope that answers your question. Do we have any more questions? Okay, going once, going twice. Okay, so we see that there is no more questions coming from the participants. That is all for the technical briefing. We from the organizer committee wish you guys a very good time here in HBP 2020 and have a good competition um, experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Arasi. I hope everybody are well informed about HBP 2020. But if you still have any question, please do ask or contact one of our company. And that's a wrap for today. Thank you everyone for gracing today's event with your presence. We truly appreciate it. And we hope that tomorrow all of you will be prepared and ready to start the tournament. And we wish the best experience and result for all of you guys. So see you tomorrow and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Have a good day everyone.
Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow.